we have our tail box here with our belt hanging out the back. And what we want to do is get this belt through the tail boom, and then that way we can slip this over the end, get our gear on, and then lock that into place. So I've seen some interesting tricks for getting this belt fed through. So the method I chose to employ is basically using something to feed the belt through for me. In this case, you remember in the unboxing, I had this plastic contraption here that I didn't know what it was. Well, now I do, thanks to many of you. This was to route the old style receiver antenna. But right now I just have a stiff piece of plastic that I'm going to use to feed my belt through. So basically just take the end of my belt, just pinch it over, and then overlap it against any end of this thing. And I'm just going to take some tape. Electrical tape would probably be easier, but I didn't see any laying around, so I'll grab this masking tape that I have here. And basically just do that. Wrap it around the end. It helps if you have a little bit of a poof right there to keep it from slipping through the tape. But anyway, basically what you did is taped this plastic rod onto the end of your belt, and that gives you something to feed through. So find the end with your notch, not the hole, the other end with the notch. Stick this through. Get it fed to there, and you'll now see on the other end you've got plenty of this hanging out. Just pull it through, and it's going to suck your belt right in with it. And then what you want to do is get your notch aligned to the side of the helicopter. I'll zoom in for you here. So I've got my my notch aligned to the left side, and then this is where I want to kind of pry this apart just enough to be able to slip that into there, and then I can push it in, and you can feel it. If you can't turn it, it's locked into that notch, but that's what I want, is that locked into that notch. For now, you don't have to worry about how far in or out it is. Just push it all the way in for now. We'll deal with this when we start doing belt tension. But in the meantime, you can see I've got my belt popped out the back end still. So, and just enough really to work with, but having that plastic rod helps me keep hold of it. So that now has the tail boom inside the heli frame. And of course this thing gets a little bit bigger and more unwieldy to deal with on video. Alright, so now I've got this belt through here. I'm going to take off the tape and basically free my belt from this rod. Make sure you hang on to the end of it, because you don't want to have to refeed it through. And as you have it held onto the end, just double check the front and make sure you're lined up appropriately onto that belt drive. I don't know if you see that in there. But basically I have it onto the gear, the drive gear there. There you go. You can probably see it like that. And when I turn this with my finger, you can see it spin that gear. Now what we want to do is make sure that our belt is not twisted up inside of there. So there's a couple ways to do it. You can sight down. Let's see if I can show you how to do this. So it is possible to sight down the tube there, and as you can see, I can see that it's not twisted. If it was twisted, it would look like that. See the difference? You can see that X inside the tube. That's the untwisted. Pretty easy to tell, and there's no weird things happening if I spin that belt. And basically I'm just hanging the whole heli off of this belt just a little bit. It doesn't have a whole lot of weight to it right now. But that's what you want to do, is you want to get that untwisted and then flat, keeping in mind you want the the actual gripper part of this belt on the inside. And once you have that, let's go back to the tabletop here. All right, before we do anything else with this and start working on the rest of the tail assembly, we do need to take care of some other items real quick on the tail boom. If you forget to put these on before you continue, you're going to hate yourself. Ask me how I know. What you have here is the tail servo mount. And basically what you want to do is get these slipped over the tail boom before you start, because these aren't going to spread out enough to get them on if you have things on both ends of the tail boom. And then the orientation for this is going to be, you want this flat side facing to the left of the heli. So see how there's the side with the screw head and it's flat? That side's going to face the left side of the heli. So slip it on just like that. Get both of those on there before you continue. The other thing you're going to want to slide on before you go any further on this is these tail control guides. There's two of them. So your servo bracket mounts are going to go on first. You'll have two of those. Just push them all the way to the front. Slip one of these tail control guides on. And then, if you want, you can go ahead and put on the tail boom mount. It's also got the horizontal stabilizer mount on it. And basically you're going to slip that on. You may have to loosen this up. Yep. So just unscrew this, loosen it up so that you can spread it out and slip it on over the tail boom. I'm not going to worry about tightening it down just yet. Just loosen it up. And you want to make sure that the flat part is on top. Actually, it doesn't really matter. It's going to spin anyway. But when you do put it on, you need to make sure that it's pointed in the right direction. And that's going to be with this collar portion facing forward, just like that. Then you can put your other control guide on. Okay, so here's what we have. Before we move any further, the two servo mounting brackets, the front control guide, the boom support bracket, and then the rear control guide. With that done, now you can finish working on the back end of this assembly. And trust me, you want to get this stuff done first. So now what we need to do is get this tail case over there. Okay, so it may be easier to leave the belt attached to the end of this. Put your tail case on first and then push the belt through. But it's easier for me to demonstrate the proper way to check the belt and make sure it's not twisted with it off. But just kind of pinch the end on, slip that through there, and just, it shouldn't push the belt all the way through. And just slip that tail case on, and you can see how the belt end pops out. I'm not going to worry about completely fastening this down just yet, but if we put that one end piece on, find that notch. Remember, there's that hole on the side that's going to fit into. That'll kind of lock that in place. Let me just take one of these these screws here. Just get them started. I'm just going to lock that in for now. Eventually we're going to put the horizontal stabilizer on here, but I'm just going to do this in a little bit different order. to show you. So I make sure that I can show you this tail pretty easily without having this huge fin hanging off the back. So anyway, you've got your belt. Oops, this is the way it's going to come out, the untwisted method, and you'll be able to check, and you'll be able to look at it. And if you move it in this direction, which is clockwise as seen from the top, you should see on the front half moving the same direction, clockwise as seen from the top. If it's backwards, you've got your belt twisted. So if there's any doubt, remember, just sight down, get your twist out of it. And this is a hugely important step, right? So if your belt is twisted, you're going to have a lot of problems when you start setting up. All right, so my belt is untwisted, and what I want to do now is get it in the proper rotation. So get your finger in there, rotate it up from the left side of the heli to the right side of the heli. Okay, flip it up like that. So whenever you turn it or pull the top of the belt, the front gears are going to run counterclockwise as seen from the top. And then once you have it like that, don't forget your shim. So put your shim on top of your little shaft here. Slip that through, grab a hold of that belt. And then you can push it into the bearing. And that's basically now what you can see is I can rotate. It should rotate nice and freely. And when I rotate it, and I've got it set on the front here, what's the best view here? There you go. So everything is spinning nice and freely. Hopefully I'm explaining this correctly. At any rate, now what we want to do is slip this other end on. And that'll capture that assembly. Okay? So from here, let's thread lock, screw this down here. Alright, so there we go. We have the tail block kind of set into place with the belt on there. And of course, you know, tension we will adjust later. But for now, let's go ahead and put this stabilizer on. So I've got a bag here with both the vertical and the horizontal stabilizers. Now that I've got some weight on the back end of this, it'll actually be helpful to have the stabilizer to help prop things up. So this is going to go on just like this, kind of pointed backwards, just like that. So what I want to do is remove these, and I'm just going to hold this tail block into place here, in place where it is. It helps a little bit that you've got your belt captured at this point by the tail case. So you know, the chances of the thing coming completely apart are pretty slim. As a matter of fact, with the belt on there, even if your notch comes out completely, this thing is not going to come off the back of the heli. So what it will do is twist and spin. So make sure you hold it in the orientation you've got it. You don't want it all twisting around. However, if you do find out it was twisted one way or the other, that would be how you'd untwist it. Would be just pull that off and rotate it. It'll probably work well for you. All right, so now I've got that off. So the way I approach this is, you know, with my tail box kind of sitting loosely right there, I will take my horizontal stabilizer, slip the screws through the outside of that, then put this little aluminum bar with our notch, our alignment notch, and basically make that assembly there. Then I'll make sure I've got some thread lock on the end of those screws, and then from there I will just slip it on. And remembering when you do this that these are a different size hex driver than you used on the rest of the tail box. So if you're not paying attention and you're using the same driver you're using for everything, you'll be sitting here spinning and spinning and spinning and wondering why nothing's catching. It's because you may have forgotten that this is a different size. Now that that's close, I want to go back in and find that alignment notch. Get that locked into place there. Now I can start snugging that down. And it can be fairly loose. I've got thread locker in there, but I'm not going to completely tighten this down just yet because I still want to make sure I have my all my alignments set. So it's pretty close, but it's not locked down. And actually, that's one of the good reasons for something like this, the green wicking thread lock, is it will allow you, after you've, in a situation like this where I want to get it all tightened down, but I may not have it in its final position, I can do some tweaks and then apply the green wicking and it'll suck it up inside there and then hold it. So anyway, side note, but we're getting close to having a tail put together. I've got a loose assembly here, but now we get to look at some more parts here. So let's see what else we got to work with. We've got this we're going to deal with, and our control arm. So let's start getting these guys put on. Alright, so pop this out. We've got a couple of brass collars, a couple of screws, and then this assembly here. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that everything is thread locked. Now we do have this brass sleeve here that basically this is a brass sleeve for the bearing that is screwed into this aluminum piece. That's two parts. Generally, my experience has been that is thread locked at the factory. It feels that way now, so I'm not going to undo this. But if you can turn this at all, and you might take a light pair of pliers and just check it. Don't put a lot of pressure, because if it's thread locked, you don't want to break that thread lock. But it feels like it's thread locked in there, so I'm going to leave that alone. What I am going to do is unscrew this ball, because that needs to be thread locked. And then the other thing I want to do, see how one side of these, I hate this design. One side of these is nice and loose, the other one is nice and not loose. It's always a challenge with these. You tighten up the screws, you want them to be snug and still have fairly loose movement. Now, we do need thread lock on this. I'm going to loosen this. So if I tighten this screw down, it really does kind of introduce some stiffness there. Not a fan. Let me see what's inside of there. So there is the plastic, and then there's a little brass sleeve which gets captured in that plastic. The reason it's sticking is because the plastic is wider than the brass sleeve. Now what I've done historically is take a little bit of sandpaper or perhaps a file and trim down some of this plastic sleeve. Get this brass piece out of there. So basically what I want to do is reduce the diameter of this just a little bit so that when everything is tightened down and that sleeve on the inside is compressed, the plastic can move back and forth. So I'm going to do that real quick on both of these. I'm just going to sand these down just a little bit to reduce some of the depth. Not a lot, but I'm going to work on that. I think that's going to help me so that whenever I tighten this down, these guys will move fairly freely. So I decided to go ahead and show you how I'm doing this. Basically, I just have these little locking clamps here. These work out great for holding little parts. This is just 100 grit sandpaper, nothing fancy, just something I had in the garage. It doesn't have to be super smooth when you're done. That plastic will kind of wear in. All I'm trying to do is just remove a little bit of the width of this plastic arm here. It doesn't take very long. 100 grit sandpaper is you know, fairly coarse. Try and remove it an even amount from both sides. There are probably easier ways to do this. A Dremel. The problem is if you use an automatic tool or an electric tool, you know, you could easily just like remove all the plastic. You don't want it to be loose that it's got play. You just basically want to shrink the dimensions just a smidge, kind of remove any burrs that might be on the plastic from the molding process, and then it doesn't hurt if it rounds out the edge just a little bit. See how I have it? It's just a little bit rounded. That's going to help too. So that's what I'm going to do for that. And then basically reinsert my little brass collar here, and that just presses in just like that. And then slip my screw through. And like I said, the goal is that you want to get this so that you can snug that screw down and not have it completely just locked up. So that's the screw tight, and you can see how easily that moves. And the other side I have done as well already. And you can see both sides move. If I'm just holding it by this plastic. So that's a lot better than it was. It didn't take a lot of work. It may not even be necessary. It may wear in on its own. But I'm really sensitive to having you know, anything binding in the tail. So it just took a few minutes to get those you know, where I think that they ought to be from the factory anyway. Now what we need to do is put some thread lock on there. And again, make sure these are snug. And this is actually a good opportunity for the Wicking thread locker. This is a good application for it because I have basically an assembly that I don't want to mess with anymore. But I want thread lock on there. Take it, and if I can just get a little dab, just a drop right there. Wipe off the excess on top. And then that's going to wick down inside of there. So let me do the same thing over here. Just take a dab. What you don't want to do is you don't want this thread locker to get all into the plastic. So once I have that on top there, I can just dab the top to get all the excess off. And then what is sitting down inside that little area is just going to wick inside there and kind of hold that. So we're going to try that. I've never used this before. I'm just going to see if it works. I think it's a great idea if it does work. The problem with it, it's so thin that it's hard to put just a little bit. All right, so we've got that on there. And now we have, let's go ahead and put the ball, thread lock that ball on. Let's get a little bit on there. Get this guy out of the way. Snug that down. Okay, we're getting closer. Make sure your bearing, isn't notchy or anything like that. It's all good. Now we get to work on connecting it to our blade grips. So we have kind of this whole assembly here that we need to finish putting together. One other thing is, so I sanded off one edge of this. I may or may not need to sand off this this other end. Time will tell. But basically you have these little brass collars. They're going to fit in the other end. And then that's what's going to screw into your blade grips once we get going here. So they're going to fit just like that. Oops, just like that. And then and screw in there. But that'll be easier once we actually get the grips onto the pitch slider. So I'm going to go ahead and slip these collars in though, so I don't lose track of them. And then you've got a set screw here, which is of the larger persuasion. And I'm going to go ahead and apply some thread lock to this set screw, because here pretty soon I'm going to be setting it into place. So as you can see, I've got some thread lock on there, and I'm going to screw it through just a little bit. Okay. Then what I want to do is slide this on to the pitch slider, and if you rotate the pitch slider, you can see, particularly on mine, there's an actual little notch there. And we're going to align the set screw with that notch. So basically, I'm going to have the screw facing up to align with the notch. And you want it so it moves freely back and forth. First thing you want to do is get this guy on. So slip that guy on. Just like that, and then we want to put this on with the notch pointed up and the set screw pointed up, and basically we're going to have that fairly free flowing back and forth. And then the goal is tighten it down just a bit and get it to lock in there. So you'll know it's locked in there because you can't move it one way or the other, and when you rotate it, it actually spins the belt drive. So once you get it there, then you can tighten it down the rest of the way. And it's a fairly finite point of attachment. There's not a lot of room for variance there. So you'll know when you've got it in there. So that's that. Now we have to deal with the pitch slider. And you can put these on before. A lot of people put them on before. I don't know. I just like to. It's easier for me to line things up if everything's already lined on the pitch slider. But how we want to do this is basically keeping in mind that this is a leading edge control tail. So as it rotates, it's going to rotate this way. And the leading edge we want to be on the top, which is where this arm is going to be. So it's going to go like that. So your arm, when it's sitting on top looking down from the top, this arm's going to be on the left side. And I'm going to go ahead and assume that I'm not going to have to do any sanding. Alright, so now that we've got our brass collar in here, we want to put the screw in here. We don't want thread lock all inside there, so don't put any thread lock on these threads yet. Get the screw through the sleeve, and you may have to, like, it may seem like you've got to thread it through to get it started. But once you get it started, it should go through fairly smoothly. And then again, you just want to get that brass collar pushed through. And it'll probably go through the rest of the way once we get it threaded. Now, this is a good time to apply thread locker because you'll be having it on the outside. Probably the best thing to do is to put thread locker inside here. That way we're not getting it all over our threads. Take and dab some thread locker on there. And then just blot off the excess on top. Flip it over. Blot off the excess on top. And you do want to get, when I say blot off the excess, you do want to make sure that there's no thread locker sitting on that end there. And then once you have that, you can run your screw through. Need to push it in just a little bit. And just be real gentle till you get it started, and then you should be good to go. It should be fairly easy. Nice. That feels nice and loose, even though I have it tightened down fairly well. So that's a good sign. That's what I'm looking for. Let me get this other side through. And again, doing this when it's on the pitch slider, for me, just feels like everything kind of holds into place a little bit easier. I don't need as many hands that way. So that feels really nice, actually. Super loose, but yet everything is snug down. You can see how much play there is. But that screw is tightened down all the way. Keeping in mind, I did not have to sand any of that. Maybe even a little bit much play, but that's okay. I'd rather have that nice and free. So, anyway, so that's the tail assembly. Now we have one more thing to add, which is our control arm here. Don't forget, there's a little shim down inside this bag. So we've got the ball that we need to apply thread lock on. So I'm just going to pull it right off, thread lock it, stick it right back in there. then the way this works is you've got, it's kind of hard to show you from the top, but the ball's going to point down. This is going to come up and attach there. We've got a little shim and a screw to hold that. And then this piece is going to capture over that bearing. And that way when you move your control rod, everything's going to move back and forth like that. Alright, so take your bolt and run it up through. And you can take out your washers and check them out, or your bearings and check them out. But it's pretty easy to tell if everything feels good. Then you should have this shim here, and that'll fit on the top, just like that. And then from the bottom, right, which I'm going to turn it sideways now so we get a better view. Let's get some thread locker on here. Remembering you want to keep it away from the bearing assembly. So get some thread lock on there, and then make sure you wipe off the excess, your finger or something else. You just want it in the threads. Get in here, capture that ball. And then get your screw started. Once you get it tightened down, you should still have plenty of free movement in your tail assembly. So your pitch slider should easily move back and forth. I mean, to the point where if you shake the heli, it should kind of move on its own. I mean, you'll be able to tell if you've got any binding in there. But basically, that is the tail assembly. Remember, this is still loose. We haven't Loctited this down and solidified it yet. We do have our belt on, which is good. Let's go ahead and get our blades on now. I don't mess around with balancing tail blades. Maybe one day I will. I haven't done it, but just for fun, let's see how well these things balance out as far as weight goes.